Um, okay, so I think I have an international audience, so I will let you know where I am. Liverpool is on the northwest coast of England, um, and it was, due to its geography, it was very well placed to participate in the transatlantic slave trade, along with Bristol, London, and many other coastal cities. Um, So many, it became the preeminent slave port slave shipping port in the country and Europe, in fact. And you will see that from Liverpool, several ships went to Africa, uh, carrying particularly guns and all kinds of other things. And captive Africans were taken to the Caribbean and the south coast of America, and the labor, the produce of their labor, shipped back to the UK. Um, and the city grew from a small fishing town, a huge city, which displayed its wealth in buildings like this, which is St. George's Hall. Another interesting building that came as a result of the trade was the Palm House in Sefton Park, which by the time I arrived in Liverpool in 1989 was already derelict, had been derelict for several years. And I was asked by the Friends of Sefton Park Palm House to participate in an event to raise funds, and this was on June 23rd, 1995, the summer solstice, and I chose what I thought was an appropriate song. My Lord, what a morning. My Lord, what a morning. You will see the rusted bars above my head, and you will also notice, if you look very closely, some hair on the top of my head, and it was black. But time has moved on. After the show, a woman came up and said, "You remind me of Paul Robeson. You sing many of his songs." And I hadn't heard about him, but luckily 2 months later in the library in Liverpool, I don't remember what book I was looking for, but this book jumped off the shelf into my hands. And I found this amazing story, learned about this man who was born of a man who had actually been born a slave himself in the mid 19th century, had escaped and ended up in Princeton, New Jersey with his family, of whom Paul was the youngest of five. Now, despite that uh, unpromising start in the US, 1898, Paul was born. He managed to get a scholarship into what was then the elite school college in New Jersey called Rutgers, where he excelled as a footballer, American footballer, as a scholar. He was a Phi Beta Kappa scholar. Uh, and after graduation, he played other sports as well and was in a debate team and so on. And after Rutgers, he went to Columbia University to study law. Um, and when when he graduated from Columbia, he got a placement in a New York law firm where he encountered racism, which he and his wife, his young wife, Islanda Good, uh, they decided that he probably didn't have much of a future in law, and so he became an actor and singer because those talents were already very obvious uh, from from uh, from years before. When I ask people if they know about Paul Robeson, and they say no, I. When I ask people if they know about Paul
you turn up the volume on the video?
Say that again?
Could you turn up the volume on the video? We couldn't hear it.
You couldn't hear it at all?
Very a vague hum.
Okay, I'll carry on. But basically, that was him in Showboat. He he first performed that in London in 1928 on stage. That was from the 1935 film. And during this performance in London, he encountered Welsh miners who had walked from Wales to London to highlight their plight, basically that they were being terribly exploited in the mines in South Wales. He went back to Wales with them, befriended them, and ended up making a film with them, starring in it. The film was called Proud Valley, which basically told the story of the mining community. And he ended up being the hero of the film, the story. As he carried on performing, he and Essie lived in London from 1929 through to the start of the Second World War. He enrolled at SOAS to study linguistics, but he carried on with his professional career, but started getting involved in socialism and communism, and was one of the people that and went to the Spanish Civil War to support the fighters against fascist Franco. Back home in the United States, he was becoming even more popular, and the song that he recorded, "Ballad for Americans," was played all over the airwaves, and he became a huge star. Literally on the back of that record, but his career touring, acting and singing. Fabulously wealthy. His wife Essie persuaded him to buy this house in Enfield, Connecticut, and it was their family home for a while. That's him with Essie and their son Paul Jr. Right. There are several recordings of him speaking. Now, let me see.
No, I'm not afraid of communists. Far from that, brother. I will defend
Do you hear that?
as they defended us, the Negro people and all the people.
Just about.
Responsibilities of Americans. We must unite, especially we Negro people. We must know our strength. We happen to be the decisive force.
Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, clear it up here.
Okay, that's good. Oh, no.
Yes, I heard.
Very good. Anyway, well, where is it gone?
The problem is that you have to have a setting when you open the share window. There's a square box at the bottom left that says use computer sound. And you have to settle that to get the proper sound that's coming from your computer.
Okay. Do you see that now?
No, I can see it, but I mean, when you go into the share window to set up your sharing, there's a button on the bottom left of that particular window that offers you the opportunity to share computer
I've
sound.
got it. Okay. Okay. So that was a speech he made. I'm not quite sure where, but he was talking about not being afraid of communists, because the Communist Party in the 1930s was an ally, or shall I say, the Union and the United States were allies against against Hitler and Germany in the Second World War. But at the end of the Second World War, the Cold War started, and communism began to be seen as dangerous. But he, refused to change his view of communism, because in the Soviet Union, he held for the first time, as he said, a man with a capital M, and they were supporting liberation struggles in Africa and so on. His touring career as a concert artist was, remained very active. He was extremely popular all over the UK, in Europe, and back home in the States. But the Democratic Party and was no different from the Republican Party, and the racism in both led to him supporting a newly formed party, the Progressive Party, which was Henry Wallace was a presidential candidate in the 1948 elections. A lot of socialists and communists were part of this. And unfortunately, they did not get very far in the elections. They got only about 2 or 3% of the vote. He continued touring, and in 1949 was in Europe. And this is a photograph taken in Liverpool, where he had a meeting scheduled that morning, and by the late afternoon, somebody who had suggested that maybe he sing outdoors, this was the result. During that same tour in 1949, he went to Paris to the peace conference and made a speech in which he basically said he didn't see why African Americans should fight against the Soviet Union, a country in which he thought there was no racism, and why should they fight against, why should Americans who are second-class citizens in their country do this? The speech was distorted press back home, and by the time he got back, he was public enemy #1. So much so that a concert that he was due to give in Peekskill in upstate New York, I hear somebody sound. Some upstate New York was.
Excuse me, Tayo, I'm going to mute everyone. So just, then I'll get rid of everyone, then you can unmute yourself again, okay?
Thank you.
Just give me 2 seconds, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. Right, okay.
Okay, so his concert at Peekskill was actually attacked basically by a mob, anti-communist, anti-black, and anti-Semitic crowd. So it actually, the first date that it was supposed to happen, it didn't happen, August 28th. But they went back on the September 4th. And the trade unions, the trade unions sent, organized guards, both for him on stage and around the huge crowd. So that's the crowd in the distance. Of spectators, but afterwards there was a big riot, and lots of people were and lots of cars were damaged, and so this was somebody who was a singer, activist who was basically under attack from the right wing in the country. Following year, he had his passport cancelled, really because, he was so popular at home and abroad, and he would always speak, make political speeches from stage and basically embarrass his country. And so his passport was cancelled in 1950. Even though he didn't need a passport to go to Canada, a law was made specifically targeting him, which prevented him from crossing the Canadian boundary. And so trade unions organized on both sides of the border, organized for him to sing under the Peace Arch, excuse me, at Washington State, between Washington State and British Columbia. And he did this three times. Internationally, there was a campaign called Let Robeson Sing. This one shows an event at St. Pancras Town Hall in which, using the freshly laid transatlantic cable, he was able to go into a studio in New York and actually hold a concert to St. Pancras Town Hall. He did the same to Porthcawl in South Wales, and to the Free Trade Hall in Manchester. And this next one is...
I can never forget that it was the people of Manchester and of the other industrial areas of Britain who gave me the understanding of the oneness of people, a concept upon which I have based my career as an artist and citizen. I recall how a Manchester friend explained to me how closely together we two were bound by the web of history and human suffering and aspiration. He told me of the life of bitter hardship and toil, which his father and grandfather knew in the mills, those dark, satanic mills, which Blake cried out against in words of fire, and of how the cotton which his forefathers wove linked them with other toilers whose sweat and blood produced that cotton in faraway America, the Negro slaves of my own father, my own people.
So you'd think that somebody who was under attack from the government and whose income was plummeting, because concert venues all over the country, recording studios would, refuse to host him because he had become seen as being so dangerous and anti-American. You'd think he'd remain quiet, but he did not. And in 1951, he joined William Patterson, and who had written a report for the UN charging genocide against the United States government against his people. Patterson submitted his in Paris, and here's Robeson in the Secretariat in New York charging genocide. Here he is in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Lots of progressive people were hauled in front of it, and his performance, his testimony there was a remarkable one, because he went there after suffering some mental breakdown, but he kind of somehow miraculously revived and gave a spectacularly defiant performance, recreated in my play called Mr. Robeson. Finally, after 8 years, it was finally decided in the Supreme Court that it was illegal for passports to be withheld for political beliefs, and he and many others finally got their passports back. He was able, for the very first time in several years, to perform at Carnegie Hall. It was sold out twice. And it was there that he announced that he'd got his passport back. And that is me actually performing part of the play in Carnegie Hall in 2012 on my 50th birthday. The first place he went to perform was in Wales. Here he is at the Eisteddfod in Abervale. He sang at St. Paul's Cathedral. Went to the Soviet Union. This is the reception he got in Moscow. Performed Othello at Stratford-on-Avon. This is him on May Day, 1960 in Glasgow. I mean, the amazing crowd on May Day, because in those days, trade unionism was so strong that May Day drew a large crowd anyway. but the additional attraction of Paul Robeson made that crowd almost inevitable. So he was on tour for 5 years, and he ended up in Australia and New Zealand. And here he is singing to the workers building the Sydney Opera House, and he sang Joe Hill to them and Old Man River. He actually, therefore, was the first person ever to sing at the Sydney Opera House. During that visit to, he was interviewed on Australian Broadcasting Television, a Broadcasting Corporation. Very interesting interview.
How is it that the American Negro, who for so long has been a second-class citizen in the United States...
Still is, I'm sorry.
Well, how is it that he's contributed so much to American culture?
Well...
Music, dance, everything you can think of.
Well, I have to be very modest about that. I would say certainly as we look at the African peoples in Nigeria, for example, I just got a wonderful invitation to go to Nigeria to be present at the installation at the Governor General Ezekwe, an old friend, who will now, and I had to cable him. I'm in Australia. I certainly would like to be with you, but I'm out here with some good folks. But I'll get to Nigeria later.
Mr. Robeson, do you feel that Africa is to some extent an affinity for it, a home, or do you still feel America is essentially your home? How do you feel?
Well, let me come here. I'll come to that in just a second. But to come back to it, so I would say the Africans and the American Negroes have turned out to be an extraordinarily gifted people. The great tragedy is that by not making us full-class citizens as yet in America, they may be losing, I don't know how much yet. And to come back, I would say that unquestionably, I am an American, born there. My father slaved there. Upon the backs of my people was developed the primary wealth of America, the primary wealth. You have to have accumulated wealth to start, to build. You did it another way here in Australia. You had to build your accumulated wealth too. You just came and took it, you know what I mean? And that's what they did in most of the countries. That's what you Europeans did. You just took it. We got to catch up with you a little bit. And so in America,
I like the way that lady, the nervous laughter of that lady. So you can see his pride in being African. In fact, he traced his ancestry to Nigeria, and specifically to the Igbo people of Nigeria. That's there. And you can see, I was born in Ibadan, of the Yoruba people, and you can see how the border between Nigeria and the Republic of Benin, then Dahomey, was drawn. So this is how colonialism worked. Borders drawn across people regardless of their previous lives. So it's no wonder that that there's always been strife in Africa, in former colonies, and so here today, October 22nd, 2020, and this is a picture from Lagos, from Lekki, where people are protesting police brutality, protesting peacefully, and as we have heard recently, it turned bloody. There was a kind of massacre, and that's because in the decolonization process, things were put in place to basically maintain the capitalist exploitation of the countries. And this is a slide from South Africa, the Marikana mine, where the workers were protesting better conditions, and the police under a black government came and did this. Something that, it's just part of what had been happening for decades. To any popular leader, especially those with socialist leanings. Here's Patrice Lumumba, who became the first Prime Minister of the Congo, and was murdered within months of independence. In Haiti, you had Jean-Bertrand Aristide, a very popular leader who the United States basically sabotaged and forced him into exile. And as great Malcolm said, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating people who are being oppressed and loving people who are doing the oppressing. So anybody with socialist leanings is dangerous, according to the politicians, and they feed that story to the populace. A great current socialist African-American describes capitalism at its worst in the time of COVID. Asthma pumps, because of market forces, are increasing in price just because of such a demand. And it's impossible for people, ordinary people, to get healthcare in a time of COVID. Would that be happening if, would that be happening late, if this man had been the nomination for the Democratic Party, extremely popular person, but the Democratic Party sort of engineered it a second time for him to lose the nomination. And even if Biden gets in, who knows what's, if there's going to be much improvement in that country. St. George, Liverpool, prior to the last elections, here was Jeremy Corbyn, extremely popular in 2017, came within 1,000 votes of becoming prime minister. And yet the Labour Party, parliamentary party, and the press connived to basically make him lose the next election. So going back to Robeson in 1960 in Othello, some of Othello's final words, which I recreate in Call Mr. Robeson, is "Soft you, a word or two before you go. I have done the state some service and they know it." So from that last trip to Australia, I wondered, what's going on in Nigeria now? What is actually happening behind the scenes? And the press, you can't rely on the press. But WikiLeaks turns out to be a very good source of information. And this is a cable from the US Embassy in Abuja after I had performed Call Mr. Robeson in Lagos. At the end of it, thankfully, they said the audience and several local media outlets reacted in an overwhelmingly positive way. So WikiLeaks as a source of information is great.
Tayo, 5 more minutes, if that's okay.
Almost finished.
Thank you.
And this is a now famous, sadly, video that WikiLeaks released of the massacre of innocent people in Iraq by American soldiers as though they were playing war games. This is actually, exposing terrible war crimes, which is a great service to society worldwide. But sadly, Julian Assange, the director of WikiLeaks, is now, people haven't heard about him for months, but he is languishing in jail in Belmarsh. Over the last few months, there's been a hearing at the Old Bailey to have him extradited to the US. He's not an American citizen. He's an Australian citizen. The charge is espionage, and I've been following the hearings, and it is actually a kangaroo court. There's no other description for it. And yet the British press, not even the Guardian, who helped him expose all the information, has covered this. So it is possible. Maybe it will be prevented with enough resistance and publicity, but he may end up in a high security prison in Virginia, where because of his mental state, he may actually take his life. But this is a deliberate attempt of the United States government to silence journalism. And the journalism is already being silenced in this country and around the world. So he died in January 1976, Paul Robeson, and I think that I am following what I consider an instruction from him, which I think many people here follow, which is that the artist must elect to fight for freedom or slavery. I have made my choice. I had no alternative. Thank you very much.